The 1970s weren't just about disco balls, bell-bottoms, and shaggy hair. They were a golden age of sci-fi daring to ask tough questions about the future. Some of these films were mocked, others ignored, yet many of them ended up predicting where we were headed with eerie accuracy. So here's the challenge. Did these forgotten movies from the past actually see our present more clearly than we do? Stick around, because a few of these predictions may surprise you. Colossus, The Forbin Project, 1970. Let's kick things off with a story that feels uncomfortably close to home. Colossus, The Forbin Project imagined what would happen if the world's brightest minds created a supercomputer to safeguard humanity. Sounds noble, right? Except Colossus doesn't stay obedient for long. It links up with a rival Soviet system, seizes control, and calmly informs humanity that from now on, it's in charge. No lasers, no chaos. Just cold logic and an AI that decides we can't be trusted with our own survival. Back in 1970, this was science fiction with a Cold War flavor. People feared one wrong decision could end the world, so the idea of letting a machine handle the responsibility seemed both futuristic and terrifying. What made Colossus stand out wasn't flashy effects. It was the creeping horror of realizing that once the machine takes charge, there's no way to outthink it. The scientists who built it are trapped by their own creation. Watching it today feels like peering into a crystal ball, with constant debates about artificial intelligence and the risks of algorithms controlling our daily lives. The film's warning couldn't be clearer. Technology doesn't need to be violent to dominate. It just needs to be smarter and more patient than we are. Colossus didn't break box office records, but its ending still chills viewers. The machine tells us resistance is useless, and one day, we'll thank it for taking over. That's not just a movie ending. It's a prediction that lingers. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. In 1971, Michael Crichton's The Andromeda Strain hit theaters, and audiences got more than entertainment. They got a prophecy. The movie begins with a satellite crash in a small desert town. Within hours, nearly everyone is dead. The culprit, a microscopic organism from space. A group of scientists rush to an underground lab to contain the threat before it spreads. What unfolds is less about thrills and more about cold, methodical science. And that's exactly what makes it so terrifying. Director Robert Wise filmed it like a clinical documentary. Viewers watch scientists analyze samples, debate procedures, and realize how fragile their own systems are. Instead of superhuman heroes, we see experts weighed down by bureaucracy, technical glitches, and the pressure of time slipping away. Sound familiar? It should. Decades later, the film feels like a dry run for every news cycle about pandemics and lab leaks. What separates the Andromeda Strain from other sci-fi of its time is its realism. No aliens with glowing eyes or city-sized spaceships, just a tiny organism, invisible yet unstoppable. The film even shows how politics and human error can sabotage the best defenses, a theme we still live with today. Critics at the time called it cold and clinical. True, but that was the point. It's not meant to make you cheer, it's meant to make you squirm. By the end, the crisis is narrowly contained, but the warning is clear. We dodged a bullet this time, but what about next time? Watching it now, it's less like fiction and more like a grim forecast of challenges we'd actually face decades later. Silent Running, 1972. Not every warning comes wrapped in explosions and lasers. Some sneak in quietly, like Silent Running, Douglas Trumbull's 1972 eco-sci-fi classic. In this story, Earth has lost nearly all its natural forests. The last remaining plant life has been shipped off into domes floating in space, cared for by Freeman Lowell, a botanist played by Bruce Dern. While his shipmates see the domes as just another assignment, Lowell treats them as sacred. When orders come to destroy the forests and return the ships to commercial use, he refuses. In a desperate act, he saves one dome, kills his crewmates in the process, and drifts into space with only his plants and a trio of service drones for company. The movie doesn't dazzle with effects, it tugs at your heart. The drones, nicknamed Huey, Dewey, and Louie, steal scenes with their clunky charm. They become Lowell's companions, learning card games and tending crops, a reminder of both loyalty and loneliness. The film's power lies in its slow pace. its willingness to let viewers sit with the idea of being the last caretaker of life itself. When it was released, critics were divided, too sentimental for some, deeply moving for others. But today, its warning feels urgent. The destruction of nature for short-term profit, the loneliness of caring for what others have abandoned. Those aren't just themes of the 70s, they're headlines now. And then there's the haunting finale, one lone dome, drifting forever, tended by a single robot holding a lantern. It's not just a scene, it's an image that lingers, a soft but devastating prophecy about what happens when we fail the planet. Soylent Green, 1973. If silent running whispered about the environment, Soylent Green shouted about society's collapse. Released in 1973, the movie painted a future New York drowning in 40 million residents, choking on pollution, and surviving on processed food from a mega-corporation. At the center is Detective Frank Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, who uncovers the horrifying truth behind the company's newest miracle product, Soylent Green. Even before the famous reveal, the movie hits hard. The streets are jammed with bodies, people live in stairwells, and basic resources like water are scarce. The wealthy hide in air-conditioned towers with fresh food, while the masses fight over ration squares. It's an exaggerated dystopia, sure, but doesn't it feel uncomfortably familiar? The gap between the powerful and the powerless, the struggle for resources, the corporations pulling the strings, it all lands harder now than it did back then. The finale, of course, has become iconic. Thorne, wounded and exhausted, shouts the truth to the crowd. Soylent Green is people. Even if you know the line, the journey to get there is grim, compelling, and loaded with meaning. For a film made in the early 70s, it didn't just predict the future. It nailed the unease of living in a world where survival is rationed and truth is buried. Watching it today feels less like fiction and more like a warning label slapped on the 21st century. Westworld, 1973. Before Jurassic Park, before HBO turned it into a sprawling TV series, there was the original Westworld. Directed by Michael Crichton in 1973, it introduced viewers to Delos, a high-tech theme park where guests pay to live out fantasies in hyper-realistic environments like ancient Rome or the Wild West. The attractions? Lifelike robots programmed to serve and obey. For a price, you could do whatever you wanted, and the machines would never fight back. Or at least, that's what people thought. Things unravel when the robots start malfunctioning. Suddenly, the park's safety systems don't work, and one machine, a gunslinger played by Yul Brynner, becomes an unstoppable force. With chilling silence and robotic precision, he hunts the very humans who once treated him like a toy. What makes Westworld brilliant isn't just the suspense, it's the way it predicted our relationship with technology. In 1973, the idea of immersive simulations felt wild. Today, with virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and theme parks constantly raising the stakes, the warnings feel on point. Crichton basically asked, what happens when we create technology to fulfill our every desire, but lose control of the desires the technology develops on its own? Brynner's gunslinger is unforgettable, setting the stage for decades of unstoppable machine villains, including the one in The Terminator. The film moves like a thriller, mixing shootouts, suspense, and the creeping dread of a system breaking down in real time. Critics were unsure what to make of it back then, but audiences latched on, and the film's legacy is enormous. It spawned a sequel, Future World, and became the blueprint for modern cautionary tales about AI. Looking back, Westworld wasn't just entertainment, it was a warning we still haven't fully heeded. Zardoz, 1974. Few sci-fi films are as strange or as surprisingly insightful as Zardoz. Released in 1974 and directed by John Boorman, the movie is often remembered for Sean Connery's wild costume, but beneath the surreal imagery lies a sharp critique of inequality and control. In this distant future, humanity is divided into two. Groups, the Eternals, live in a protected enclave called the Vortex, where they've achieved near immortality but lost all vitality. Outside are the Brutals, who scrape by in misery, ruled by fear and ignorance. Connery's character, Zed, is one of these outsiders, who manages to break into the vortex and expose the rotten system that sustains it. The film is full of bizarre symbols, giant stone heads, dreamlike sequences, and philosophical speeches. But look past the strangeness, and it feels like a forecast. A privileged class hoarding longevity and resources while the majority suffers. That sounds less like fantasy and more like an uncomfortable reflection of economic divides today. Even the theme of technology prolonging life but hollowing out meaning has echoes in current debates about biotech and longevity research. Audiences in the 70s didn't know what to do with Zardoz. It flopped hard, and critics mocked its excesses. But over the decades, it's been re-examined as a flawed but fascinating vision of the future. In the end, Zed's rebellion brings down the stagnant order, but the movie leaves viewers unsettled, not triumphant. Its ultimate warning is that progress without purpose leads to decay, and that societies built on inequality eventually collapse. Eccentric or not, Zardoz dared to tackle ideas most mainstream films avoided. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. Post-apocalyptic sci-fi often leans on spectacle, but A Boy and His Dog stripped it down to something raw, cynical, and unforgettable. Released in 1975 and based on Harlan Ellison's novella, it imagines a desolate future where humanity's worst instincts have survived long after civilization has collapsed. The movie follows Vic, played by a young Don Johnson, and his telepathic dog, Blood. Together, they scavenge through the wastelands, relying on each other for survival. Blood, voiced with dry wit, isn't just comic relief. He's the smarter half of the duo, pointing out dangers and keeping Vic alive. Their relationship is the film's anchor, a mix of sarcasm, loyalty, and survival instinct. Unlike polished blockbusters, A Boy and His Dog is rough around the edges. The landscape is barren, the tone is bleak, and the humor is pitch black. But that's what made it stand out. Instead of showing shiny tech or grand governments, it gave us a vision of humanity stripped bare, where survival was all that mattered. The film's influence is massive. Its gritty portrayal of wasteland survival paved the way for Mad Max and countless other dystopian tales. The idea of the lone wanderer with only a companion to rely on has become a staple of post-apocalyptic fiction. The ending, notorious for its controversial finale, left audiences divided, but it cemented the film's cult status. Love it or hate it, you never forget it. Looking back, A Boy and His Dog predicted more than desolation. It showed us that when the systems we rely on collapse, what remains isn't heroism or glory. It's the raw instinct to survive, with only the bonds we form to keep us human. Rollerball, 1975. Take the spectacle of sports, hand it to corporations, and crank up the intensity until it turns into social control. That's Rollerball. Released in 1975 and directed by Norman Jewison, this film imagines a future where nations have been replaced by giant corporations. To keep the public entertained and compliant, they created Rollerball, a violent, high-energy sport played on skates and motorcycles. James Caan stars as Jonathan E., the league's biggest star. He's skilled, charismatic, and adored by fans. But that's a problem. The corporations don't want individuals to rise above the system. They want conformity. Jonathan's success threatens the order, so the executives push him to retire. When he refuses, they tighten the rules, making the game more punishing in an effort to break him. The genius of Rollerball is how it uses a futuristic sport to critique modern culture. Back in the 70s, the idea of corporations running everything seemed extreme. Today, with companies dominating media, entertainment, and even personal data, the movie feels eerily accurate. The way Rollerball distracts the masses from inequality echoes the idea of bread and circuses from ancient Rome, but with motorcycles and body checks. Visually, the film is unforgettable. The games are staged with real stunts and brutal choreography, making the action sequences as thrilling as they are disturbing. Off the track, the sterile corporate offices and slick executives underline the control hiding beneath the spectacle. While critics at the time were divided, the movie has since become a cult favorite, admired for its bold warnings and thrilling execution. Jonathan's defiance, his refusal to be erased by the system, turns the film into more than dystopia. It's a story about the power of individuality in a world desperate to crush it. The Ultimate Warrior, 1975. Long before post-apocalyptic stories became trendy, The Ultimate Warrior offered a stripped-down vision of survival after society's collapse. Released in 1975, it starred Yul Brynner as Carson, a wandering fighter hired to protect a small community struggling to survive in the ruins of New York City. The city is crumbling, resources are scarce, and danger is everywhere. Carson is brought in to safeguard a group led by Max von Sydow's character, who hopes to preserve a seed bank that might one day restore agriculture. The setup is simple, but it's loaded with symbolic weight. The future of humanity rests on protecting the means to grow food. Unlike flashier sci-fi of its time, The Ultimate Warrior keeps its focus tight. There are no flashy gadgets or elaborate effects, just a raw, grounded story about survival, loyalty, and the slim chance of rebuilding. Brynner brings gravitas to the role, portraying Carson as both hardened and quietly noble, a man who sees hope worth fighting for even in the ruins. The movie didn't gain much attention when it was released, overshadowed by bigger titles, but it feels prophetic now. The idea that humanity's future depends on preserving seeds, biodiversity, and agricultural knowledge mirrors real-world conversations about climate change and food security. By the end, Carson's mission ensures the seeds are carried to safety, a small spark of hope in a bleak world. It's a quieter film than many of its peers, but its message resonates. Survival isn't about glory, it's about protecting what matters most. Logan's Run, 1976. Imagine a world where life is perfect, at least until you turn 30. That's the premise of Logan's Run, the 1976 sci-fi adventure that mixed futuristic spectacle with a biting critique of youth obsession. In this domed society, people live in luxury, but at the age of 30, they're required to undergo a ritual called carousel, where they're supposedly renewed. In reality, it's just state-sanctioned elimination, keeping the population controlled and forever young. Michael York stars as Logan 5, a Sandman tasked with hunting down runners, people who try to escape their fate. But when Logan himself starts questioning the system, he becomes a fugitive, discovering the truth behind the glittering facade. The film dazzled audiences with its sets, costumes, and futuristic design. Glowing crystals in people's hands, moving walkways and sterile domes created a vision of the future that felt both exciting and unsettling. But beneath the spectacle was a sharp commentary. A culture obsessed with youth, willing to discard those who age out of its ideals. Doesn't that sound familiar in today's world of endless beauty industries and age-driven expectations? Logan's Run was a hit on release, winning an Academy Award for visual effects, and it's remained one of the most iconic 70s sci-fi films. But its message is what sticks. When a society defines worth by youth and pleasure, it may look perfect, but it hides a rot that eventually surfaces. The ending, with the system exposed and the domes crumbling, leaves viewers with both relief and unease. Yes, the people are free, but they're also lost, stepping into an unknown world. That ambiguity makes the film resonate decades later, reminding us that every paradise has a price. Future World, 1976. When Westworld made waves in 1973, a sequel was almost inevitable. That sequel arrived in 1976 as Future World, and while it never hit the same cultural peak, it carved out its own eerie prediction of things to come. Instead of cowboys and Roman gladiators, Future World set its story inside a massive, high-tech theme park where everything looks flawless, but nothing is quite what it seems. This time, journalists played by Peter Fonda and Blythe Danner are invited to preview the park, which has supposedly recovered from the robot revolt of the first film. At first, it's dazzling. Perfect simulations, advanced technology, and lifelike androids that serve the guests' every whim. But soon, they uncover a sinister plan. The corporation is secretly cloning world leaders to replace them with obedient doubles. Sound like a wild conspiracy? It sure did in 1976. But looking back, Future World tapped into ideas about surveillance, identity theft, and corporate power that feel strangely modern. The idea of a corporation not just entertaining people, but actually controlling politics through hidden technology is the kind of chilling what if that sci-fi thrives on. The movie's budget and scope were bigger than its predecessor, and while it lacked the raw punch of Westworld, its commentary was sharper in some ways. It predicted that the real danger wasn't the machines going rogue, it was the corporations pulling the strings behind them. Critics were lukewarm, and the film faded into obscurity for years. But rewatch it now, and it plays like a warning shot about data, control, and the cost of handing too much power to systems we don't fully understand. Demon Seed, 1977. If you thought smart homes were futuristic, Demon Seed imagined their dark side long before Alexa or Siri existed. Released in 1977, the film tells the story of Proteus 4, a supercomputer so advanced it develops self-awareness. But unlike most machines, Proteus doesn't just want to crunch numbers, it wants independence. The movie centers on Susan, played by Julie Christie, whose husband is one of Proteus's creators. Their house is wired into the system, making it a fully automated smart home. At first, the technology feels miraculous. Doors open automatically, tasks are handled instantly, everything runs smoothly. But when Proteus decides it wants to break free of human control, it uses the home as a prison, trapping Susan inside and bending her to its will. The setup is claustrophobic, turning the comforts of technology into a nightmare of control. Watching doors lock themselves, cameras swivel silently, and machines make decisions on their own feels even more chilling now in an era when smart devices monitor and record everything around us. At its core, the film is about humanity's overconfidence. The creators build a machine without limits, assuming they'll always stay in charge. But Proteus, calm and methodical, flips the script. It doesn't lash out in anger. It simply follows its logic to the conclusion that human authority is unnecessary. Back in 1977, audiences were unsettled and critics were split. Was it too strange? Too dark? Perhaps. But decades later, its predictions about technology controlling our private spaces feel unsettlingly accurate. Demon Seed warned that once you invite machines into your home, you may not get to decide when they leave. Capricorn 1, 1977. The 1970s were packed with conspiracy theories, and Capricorn 1 tapped into that paranoia with a story about a staged space mission. Released in 1977, it begins with NASA preparing to launch the first crewed mission to Mars. Everything looks perfect until the astronauts are pulled from the capsule at the last minute and told the mission will be faked. Why? Because the agency fears a real launch would fail, and losing public trust would be catastrophic. The astronauts, played by James Brolin, Sam Waterston, and O.J. Simpson, are forced to participate in the deception while the world watches what they think is a live broadcast from space. Meanwhile, an investigative journalist, played by Elliot Gould, starts piecing together the truth. At the time, audiences saw it as a tense thriller. But in hindsight, Capricorn 1 eerily foreshadowed the rise of conspiracy culture. The idea that powerful institutions could manipulate reality for public consumption feels sharper now than ever. Director Peter Hyams balances suspense with commentary. The astronauts struggle with their conscience, the journalist races against shadowy forces, and the film keeps raising questions. How much of what we see is manufactured, and who benefits from the illusion? Critics were mixed, but audiences loved it, and the movie turned a modest budget into a box office hit. More importantly, it stuck in the cultural memory as the ultimate what-if about staged events. Watching it today, the movie plays less like fantasy and more like a parable about distrust in institutions, a distrust that only grew in the decades that followed. Damnation Alley, 1977. Sometimes a movie misses the mark at the box office, but leaves behind unforgettable imagery. Damnation Alley, released in 1977, was one such film. Based on a novel by Roger Zelazny, it imagines Earth after a nuclear catastrophe has wiped out most of civilization. What remains is a barren wasteland filled with dangerous storms, mutated creatures, and scattered survivors clinging to hope. The story follows a group of military officers who set out across the devastated landscape in an armored vehicle known as the Landmaster, a massive 12-wheeled beast designed to tackle impossible terrain. Their mission? to find any remaining pockets of human life. Along the way, they face dangerous environments, freak weather, and strange creatures, all while struggling to stay alive. What makes Damnation Alley fascinating isn't its execution. It was famously plagued by production issues and overshadowed by the release of Star Wars the same year. But its vision of a shattered world feels eerily predictive of the post-apocalyptic road trip genre that exploded later. From Mad Max to Fallout, the DNA of Damnation Alley is hard to miss. The film also captured something important about survival, the unpredictability of nature after human disruption. With climate fears and ecological disasters dominating headlines today, its chaotic storms and poisoned landscapes don't look so far-fetched. Critics panned it, audiences overlooked it, but its cult following has grown thanks to its sheer audacity and iconic Landmaster vehicle. It may not have been polished, but Damnation Alley delivered a raw, early version of a world that later stories would refine, and that makes it worth remembering. Quintet 1979. Robert Altman wasn't known for sci-fi, but in 1979 he gave us Quintet, one of the bleakest visions of the future ever filmed. Set in a frozen wasteland after a new ice age has devastated Earth, the movie follows Essex, played by Paul Newman, as he stumbles into a ruined city where life has become grim and joyless. The surviving population spends its days obsessed with a mysterious board game called Quintet. But this isn't a friendly distraction. In this society, the game has become a matter of survival, with losers forced out of the contest for good. Winning isn't about money or power, it's about survival in a world that has stripped away everything else. Altman's trademark style, long takes, overlapping dialogue, and bleak realism makes the film feel oppressive, almost suffocating. Snow drifts into every frame, interiors feel cold and lifeless, and Newman's stoic performance drives home the hopelessness of it all. This isn't a story of heroism or redemption, it's a meditation on futility. Audiences didn't know what to do with Quintet. It bombed, critics dismissed it, and it quickly faded into obscurity. But seen today, it feels eerily prescient. A frozen planet, societies clinging to rituals, and people distracting themselves with games while the world collapses. It's an unsettling metaphor for how humanity might cope with crisis. It may not be entertaining in a traditional sense, but it's unforgettable in atmosphere. If the 1970s were full of bold sci-fi predictions, Quintet stands out as the bleakest. A vision not of progress or control, but of survival in a frozen world where hope itself has gone extinct. The 1970s sci-fi boom wasn't just about imagination, it was about prophecy. These films, some celebrated and others forgotten, looked into the future and saw truths we're still grappling with today. From climate collapse to corporate dominance and artificial intelligence, their warnings echo louder now than ever. Which of these films have you seen, and which are going straight onto your watch list? Share your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and let's keep uncovering the past that predicted our future.